All right. Are we all ready? Now I gotta remember what I say.
Hi, everyone. This is Natalie Egan. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and welcome to the HR Wonder Woman show with Wendy and Ann. Enjoy the show.
Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of HR Wonder Women. I'm your host, Wendy, and with me, as always, is Ann. Hi, Ann. How are you tonight?
Hi, Wendy. I am doing well. So far, I haven't tripped over my words, so I'm waiting to hear when it's going to happen. When it does, I think it's going to be spectacular.
Oh, I hope so. I hope so. And we'll be sure to keep that in the show. We aren't going to cut it at all. So I'm super excited because we have someone on the show tonight that you got to meet at the SHRM Diversity and Inclusion Conference last fall. And you said, we need to have her on. And I said, okay, let's bring her on. I'm excited. I'm always excited to learn from other folks. And I think this is going to be a great long conversation. So we'll keep our small talk extremely small. And please introduce our guest and let's kick off this awesome conversation.
Terrific. Okay. I am super excited. As Wendy said, I got a chance to hear Natalie share at the SHRM Diversity and Inclusion Conference last October, and I've been looking forward to this conversation ever since. So let me just start with the introduction. Natalie J. Egan is an openly transgender B2B software entrepreneur and a recognized thought leader living her life at the intersection of technology and diversity and inclusion. Natalie has over 20 years of experience driving digital change, developing high-performing teams, building complex products, and selling enterprise solutions. Today, she is the CEO and founder of Translator, where she and her team are on a mission to scale empathy and equality through technology. Prior to founding Translator in 2016 and prior to her transition, Natalie was CEO and founder of PeopleLinks, a venture capital-backed sales technology solution that was acquired in 2015. In addition to her entrepreneurial pursuits, Natalie has also worked in leadership positions at large public companies like LinkedIn, Autonomy, and Ecolab. Outside of work, Natalie is a parent, a runner, and a consummate activist for transgender rights and representation. Based in New York City, Natalie received her undergraduate degree from Cornell University, her MBA from the Villanova School of Business, and is currently writing her first book about her transition from a male to female CEO in corporate America and the business lessons learned along the way. Natalie, thank you so much for joining us. I am super excited for this conversation. And I want to start with what is basically our first question always. And this is my fumbling part, guys. I can't find, and I apologize for that too, because I'm even working on that, calling people guys. And that was something actually that I learned from you, Natalie, last October, and was then like horrified at how often I do it. And I'm working on that. Okay, so found the questions. So Natalie, we know that intersectionality matters. It's the reason we do this podcast. We all have many ways in which we identify, and different parts of our identity matter more in some spaces than others. When thinking about this conversation tonight, how do you identify? And you've already shared your pronouns, which I think I forgot. My pronouns are she, her, and hers.
Oh, gosh. So first of all, Wendy, Ann, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. This is super exciting, and it's a real privilege. So thank you for having me. And thank you for the introduction and taking the time to talk about your identities and sharing that with us. And in terms of my identity and the topic of intersectionality, all this is really important to me. And I think especially with the topic of intersectionality, if you think about sort of that framework and the history of intersectionality, and it originally started with Kimberly Crenshaw, and sort of as a way or a framework to, really explore the oppression of women of color within society in particular. So it sort of has a foundation of race and as at the base. And I identify as a white trans woman, and I think that intersectionality has evolved as a construct for us to look at our entire identity in a lot of ways. So more than a white trans woman, able-bodied, et cetera, I identify at the highest level as human, right? And I identify as a parent. and I identify as a runner and an athlete, and I also identify as an entrepreneur. And I also just happen to identify as transgender, and it's sort of just of the puzzle. It oftentimes comes out first, and I think that that's kind of par for where we are as a society, but it's just one piece of my identity. And I'm very excited to be a part of this conversation today and explore all this, especially through an HR lens. So thank you.
Yes. Well, and I think that's important that, we're talking about it now to make it normal. And the more we talk about it, the more normal it becomes. I was listening to Love It or Leave It this morning on my drive. And John Lovett made a comment about, I think it was John said something like, gay white male. And I was like, should we just start all saying, straight white female? Should we just start throwing those in more and more and more so that we can stop eventually? Because it's as long as we put it out there, the more we put it out there, the less noticeable it will become. And we'll just hopefully stop caring. That's the goal, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think the idea is, I think we've moved beyond this time where we would say things like, I don't see race, or I don't see color, right. Or, in HR, like there's this old sort of adage that, we don't, I can't remember actually how they said it specifically, but it was sort of like, it's just sort of the way that we hire. We're just hiring for, the best person for the job, but we're not really looking at the whole process. And I think, when people say, I don't see color, or I don't see race, I mean, that's really quite a shame, right? Because people want to be seen and they want to be heard. And I think that the problem is when we weren't talking about these things, it was shrouded and it wasn't talked about. And it leads to stigma. And, there's an incredible stigma around the trans identity and experience. And it comes from, the lack of information and resources and, this sort of very dangerous tropes that came out of the early 80s that, really propagated a lot of the education that early education about what we got or who trans people were. And, now that we live in the age of the internet, we're seeing this sort of revolution, but the reality is we've always been around, and just nobody talked about it. And so it does really create a very dangerous scenario to not talk about it. And I think, long term, if we can, put it all out there and we can all be ourselves, yes, I think it will return, or not return to normal, but become the new normal.
Yes.
And that's why this conversation matters. It's why language matters. It's why intersectionality matters, and all representation matters. All this stuff really matters if we want to make a difference. Otherwise, we're just going to get more of the same. And, that what got us here is not going to get us where we need to go.
Exactly. And that's why for me, it's a privilege to be able to have these conversations, and because I know I'm going to get it wrong, and I need to talk with people like you, Natalie, so that I can learn and get it right next time, because that's who we want to be.
Well, and I think, thank you for saying that. And it is a process, and it's hard, especially with the guys thing, right? Like that's just, we gender our language all the time, and we don't even realize what we're saying. And, I appreciate you very much acknowledging that earlier. I was going to actually say something to you but yeah, I mean, it's really important that we, and just to bring the audience up to speed, whenever I do talks or, especially panels with large groups of people on both sides, the word guys gets thrown around a lot, like you guys, what do you guys think of this? I always declare those kind of, those conversations a no guys zone. And very simply, we just buzz people when they say, very gendered language, like you guys, or, hey, can you hang out? Can you hang with the big boys? Those all get a buzzer. And so it's just a simple kind of fun way to just remind us. It's sort of a little interrupter that we can just put into our language to help us kind of go, oh, right, I forgot. And just move on. You don't have to give a big apology. You just kind of move on.
Yeah. And like you said, language matters. I have, I have 2 girls in Girl Scouts, and when they are in their troop, I very purposely say, "Hey, ladies," when I'm trying to get their attention. One, because they don't hear that often, so it gets their attention. But it's a very specific word of who I want them to be and who needs to pay attention. So I really...
You have to be a little careful, to be honest. I mean, it sounds a lot safer, but I think in general, if we can avoid calling large groups of people by any one label, that has expectations built into it, it can be helpful and liberating, right? I mean, words like team and folks and y'all, I love y'all.
Yes.
But all of these things are good, non-gendered ways of getting people's attention. But I know we have a lot more to the podcast.
That's awesome. Yes. We could probably spend an hour on this alone, I think.
I think we could. And I feel like I want a buzzer for I want something to buzz me all the time, because it's true. When I caught myself earlier today, I hearing you say that in October was very impactful, and it is a struggle because I got 50 plus years using this language, and figuring out how to change it is
it's hard.
A slog. Yeah.
All right, we're going to move on.
I was about to start to add something to that, and I was like, "Shut up, Natalie! Shut up."
Well, let's move on, because again, we could have a long conversation about this, and maybe we'll all be at a conference somewhere where we can sit down with some beer or wine or water or whatever it is you want to have in your glass, and talk about it more. I think that would be great.
That'd be awesome.
So, Natalie, before you transitioned, you grew a large HR tech company related to the business side of HR. And since transitioning, you've used those same tech skills to focus on scaling empathy in business. Talk to us about that journey. That's fascinating.
Yeah, so there's a lot to that. I mean, it has been quite a journey. And as I said earlier, I do identify as an entrepreneur. I'm a serial entrepreneur, actually. I've been starting businesses and trying to help people, in some form or fashion since I was about 5 years young. And but prior to Translator, which is my current company, I started a business called People Links, and we were an HR tech sort of change management software solution that was designed to help show people how to use social media at scale, based on their specific role inside of an organization. So think of it as sort of like a rules engine that a large company could kind of program best practices, and then it would guide you in real time what to do on social media based on these rules. So your pipeline, your position inside of an organization, and that was a great company. It took off like a rocket ship, and sort of fell just as quickly in a lot of ways. But we were one of the sort of social media darlings back in the day, and it was not the exit or the kind of outcome that we were all looking for, but it certainly taught me a lot about how to build software that's designed to kind of change people's attitudes and behaviors over time. And that's really what we're doing today. So in a lot of ways, it's a very similar business model. It's nearly identical in a lot of ways, but instead of teaching social media at scale, we're teaching empathy at scale. So the sort of theory or thesis behind this is, how do we, spread empathy and equality at scale?
So that whole idea of scaling empathy, because we are looking at this through an HR lens, how should HR professionals be thinking about building empathy in our organizations? Kind of like the how behind it, the why behind it, the how it is possible, I think, behind it, because it doesn't, at first glance, it doesn't seem like something that you can scale, right? Because empathy is relational, and it's telling stories, and it's getting to know each other, and it's right, like you build empathy through those one-to-one conversations and relationships. So talk to us about how we can think about it, taking kind of that concept and scaling that so that empathy becomes part of our, like, integral into our organizational culture.
Yeah, so I think traditionally empathy was something that was hired for, and people sort of thought that it was very hard, if not impossible, to teach. And I think that sort of has been just the way it was and the way it is for a very, very long time. And I think companies can no longer afford to kind of look the other way when it comes to culture. It's really more risk. There's more risk in doing nothing than there is, to get active and involved. And the problem is, culture is this traditionally been sort of this black hole. It's very hard to understand and measure and touch and feel. And, there's that old saying that you can't improve something if you can't measure it. And so I think we're in this whole new era now where, culture is really one of the last frontiers of digital transformation inside the enterprise. And I think we've seen digital transformation kind of take over every part of the business, from sales and marketing to product development, and of course, HR. And now we're starting to see it really, sort of productize or digitize in the space of culture. And it's very exciting, but it requires a shift in how you think and how the organization can kind of go about its business. And we're sort of at the beginning of that journey, right? And it's a crawl, walk, run for sure. So, where we are today and where we are in 6 months, 12 months, 5 years is going to look a lot different. But companies, they need to get, woke, right? They need to become conscious of this. And I think that a lot of the empathy journey for the individual is very similar to the empathy journey for the organization. And it starts with self-awareness. And I think that, part of the reason traditional diversity and inclusion training and all kind of really, even more so the compliance training sort of bounces, it doesn't stick, right? It feels like a lecture. And none of that, no diversity and inclusion training will stick if people feel like they're being lectured, and they don't, especially if they don't understand their own identity first. And I think when you think about this as a journey, a company has to look at itself and have its own self-awareness exercise and say, who are we? What are we? What matters to us? And people are collectives. They're large groups of people, and that's their biggest asset and also their biggest liability at the same time. And to be able to put some mechanisms in place to ensure that people are on a continuous sort of learning cycle of empathy is really important. And empathy, as squishy as it sort of seems, there's actually a pretty solid framework for teaching empathy that's quite, it's historically, been sort of accredited and been used for many, many years. And it's called the 3 pillars of empathy. And the first pillar of empathy is self-awareness. And the second pillar of empathy is sort of context or history. So if you imagine, like, pillar 1 is learning about yourself, pillar 2 is now literally a history lesson of learning about other people, right? Other diverse cultures. And so now that you've answered, kind of, or at least have hopefully a better understanding of why and who you are, and then you kind of understand a little bit better why and who other people are, then the third pillar is interaction. And it's sort of like batting cages and simulations and testing. And traditionally, it's a very linear learning experience. You go pillar 1, 2, and then 3, and then the training's over and you go back to the real world. And what we're doing is we're building a technology system that's designed to kind of keep that in a loop and keep people engaged all the time so that they're constantly learning about themselves, constantly learning about others, and then putting those things into action so that they can learn and grow. And believe me, it's not going to be perfect. In fact, there's going to be times when it's ugly. but in the name of progress and in the spirit of openness and moving the culture, we just have to be ready for those things. And there's best practices to get ready for it, but this is people, right? This is not, a finance algorithm running in the background. These are people involved. So we have to bring humanity to this as well.
Very cool. So Natalie, you were recently featured as one of Rent the Runway's Women of the Future. And you talk about the importance of finding community and developing the self-confidence to change your life. It's one of the things that Anne really remembers when she heard you speak last year, that your story is inspiring to anyone who wants to make a change in their life. So how can people develop that confidence to do what makes them feel most truly themselves? And why is that important?
Oh, gosh. So
got deep real fast.
Yeah. So in terms of like my background, I prior to my transition, I was a very sort of, typical bro, I sort of, talk about bro culture and brotopia and like all the toxic bro things that you can think of. Like that was me. And, I certainly didn't struggle with my confidence externally. I think everybody thought of me as a very confident person. Ironically on the inside, I didn't have a lot of confidence at all. But certainly transitioning has been, quite the journey for me in terms of trying to kind of like find my new self and do that really on the fly, right? So I'm now 42 years young. I started transitioning when I was 39, and I have 3 kids and a family and, a professional career that's, kind of embedded in a certain, space. And, there's a lot of moving parts, and architecture to my identity. And, I really had to kind of rebuild a lot of it on the fly. And, I couldn't just hit pause and sort of go incubate and hibernate and become me. I had to do it in real time. And a big part of being a woman is being confident in who you are. And a big part of that is how you express yourself. And I actually think of, when I think about gender and gender constructs and ultimately kind of identity, I think a lot about what it means to express yourself. And I think of my identity as an expression more than anything else, right? I'm an athlete, I'm a parent, I'm an entrepreneur, I happen to be trans. All of these things, build up this expression of who I am every single day. And a big part of your expression is your clothes, and it's a palette, right? I think I've always been an artist. And prior to transitioning, I could never use the medium, like the ultimate medium, right? Which is yourself. And so I was sort of forced to express myself through external, canvases, if you will, or pottery, or, even business was an expression of who I was and what I am. But, clothing has always been something I've been particularly passionate about, but could never express myself with. And as I found myself, transitioning as a woman, a professional woman in a tech industry dominated by men, that, clothing is a big part of that. And it's really quite challenging and expensive. And there's a lot of time that goes into it, a lot of experimentation and things that I never had access to. You wouldn't believe how much tribal knowledge is handed down in slumber parties, from when you're like, a teenage girl through high school, your experimentation, all those phases of, figuring out your identity and figuring out who you are. Like I don't have time for that, or I haven't had time for that. And so Rent the Runway has become this like really key part of like how I express myself. And it's also very cost effective, not to turn this into an advertising, but it's cost effective, it's efficient. And I just show up and I basically tell them like what I need for the week, and like I show up at the store and they've got 15 outfits waiting for me to rent and walk away with. And so I've become a big fan of Rent the Runway, and I think that kind of caught their attention at some point. And I'm a pretty regular in the store, but it's confidence is key to us being our authentic selves, and it can take a while to find that. And it's a process, right? It's not like, hey, you just find it one day and there it is. Like, it's kind of, it's squishy, and it takes a while to really nail it. And I think I'm just starting to do that now. But in terms of the second part of your question, in terms of giving people the confidence to really be themselves, everybody's different. Every person, oftentimes the stories are very similar, but the people are different. Especially in the trans community. It's actually really alarming to me how similar the stories are. It's the same pattern over and over and over again. But at the end of the day, whether it's our gender or our career or the relationships we're in, I mean, we all kind of live in these prisons of other people's expectations. And, for some of us, it's the moment that we're born, right? Like that moment when they hold the baby up and they say, oh, it's a boy or it's a girl. And then they just shower that child with expectations of masculinity or femininity, with a name and colors and toys and all these expectations. And the same thing is true for anyone that's, their father and their father's father and their father's father's father was a lawyer, or, you're in a situation with a prearranged marriage. Like, these things can be really restricting of us in terms of our identity and our authentic selves, and tragically so. I mean, it's really quite devastating. And I was never conscious of any of this until I transitioned. And even once I transitioned, it took me a while, and I still, I'm still always on this journey. I will be for the rest of my life, of becoming more woke and conscious. But I started sharing my story publicly about 2.5 years ago, kind of analog and one-to-one at first, and then kind of smaller groups of people. And then I started writing about it and blogging. And then eventually I got a pretty big opportunity to speak on stage. It's still probably one of my biggest stages to date. And it was my first stage, my first time on stage as Natalie. And there was probably 500 people in the audience. And I think there was almost 350,000 people or something ridiculous, streaming online. So almost more than a third, more than 250,000 people online. And I shared my story, and I guess I expected people to be, I don't want to say I expected people to be grateful, because that sounds very strange. I expected, the kind of normal things that you would experience when you get off stage doing something like that. And and a lot of people were very grateful. They were there, it was hugs and tears. But what I didn't expect, and really the greatest gift of all, is that by me sharing my story with people started sharing their stories with me. And that I was not expecting, right? And people started writing me letters and scheduling meetings with me and taking me out to lunch and sitting down with me and telling me privately, one-on-one, these incredible stories of their transitions, but rarely transitions of their gender. It was stories of transitioning out of abusive relationships, and stories transitioning out of dead-end jobs or jobs that they never wanted to be in the first place. And that really got me. I mean, that's when my empathy journey started. I mean, I talk about, my journey to becoming Natalie, really was my journey to empathy. And prior to transitioning, I honestly, as funny as anyone may think this sounds online, and I've actually found it to be pretty common, because a lot of people come up to me afterwards and they're like, I didn't know that either. But I would confuse the word sympathy with empathy. Mm. And, so I didn't even know what it really meant And I just sort of felt bad for people, but I didn't know what it was like to actually walk in their shoes or feel what they feel. And the gift was when people started sharing their stories with me and I could feel what they felt. And one person, I know this is a little long story, but one person in particular wrote me a very long, probably 3-page letter on Facebook as a private direct message saying that them hearing my story gave them the courage to change jobs. And, they had been an auto mechanic in a family-run auto business their whole life. Their 2 older brothers and their dad and their mom all worked in the mechanic business, the auto business. And they wrote me and said that they put in their notice and said that, they have enrolled in massage therapy school. And that's their gift. And that's what they were always supposed to do. And they said to me, if you have the courage to change genders, I can certainly have the courage to change jobs. And I broke down crying. To be honest, actually, the first time I read it, it didn't affect me that much. I had to reread it and really let it sink in for me to go, oh my gosh, this person has really suffered the exact same way I have. They weren't suffering with their gender. They were suffering because of these other expectations that were put onto them. So I think that's really important. And I know it's a long answer, but that's kind of the journey.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing your story. I was thinking how we started kind of at the beginning of this conversation talking about how like labels and identity are important, but it would be nice to get to a point where they're just a fact, but not quite so weighted. And I think that when you share your story and people hear that story and they can identify and say, okay, it wasn't my gender that I needed to change, but it was this other thing that was really crushing me that I needed to change. It was these other expectations that society or my family or whatever it was were putting on me. I think when we start building that kind of empathy, like, yeah, you grew your empathy and that's amazing. When other people can also start growing their empathy, then it ceases the othering of people who are trans, so that it becomes a fact about you, but not this weighted fact about you. Right. And then you are a runner and an entrepreneur and a woman who happens to be trans, right? Instead of feeling like it's always leading with, I'm a trans woman who happens to be a runner and an entrepreneur, right? Like we flip that by building that empathy that people can say, oh, that's one journey. We've all got like places where we can identify with that.
And exactly. To your point earlier, my outlook or my sort of thought process around like labels and in particular stereotypes has changed dramatically. I think stereotypes in general, I've always kind of considered they, are kind of bad, but like labels were kind of good. And now I've really shifted quite a bit. I get labels. I think they're valuable for like inanimate objects, like a rock. Like you could put a rock in a drawer, label it a rock, and like the rock's never going to talk back to you, and the rock is never going to say like, but I'm more than a rock. And so I get the logic of it, but it doesn't apply well to people. And I think that's where we need to, there needs to be like a little asterisk or some sort of caveat that when we're talking about people, we're not talking about inanimate objects. We're talking about real people that have feelings and are multidimensional. And, we don't have the right to put upon them any of our own expectations based on labels that we were taught from some other, cultural inheritance of that knowledge. So I agree with you on that.
Yeah. And to kind of follow up on that, so we don't expect you to talk for all trans people. But you are very open about being a trans woman. So going back to that HR lens that we were talking about, as what kinds of things would you like for HR professionals to know that you think it would be helpful for HR professionals to know when interacting with employees and colleagues, and then also the kind of influence that we can have on the culture of our organizations, thinking specifically how we can be inclusive and all the other great words we have for welcoming people from all backgrounds.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's a great question. And I actually, in terms of my privilege and my responsibility, I think that's one of my big, I don't want to say it's like a calling, but it's a big part of who I am, that I have the opportunity to work with a lot of HR professionals and businesses in general. And I talk a lot about how they can help the trans community. And I think, first and foremost, you kind of really have to look at the numbers. And I think that's where a lot of people immediately don't even realize statistically, like what we're talking about here. I think, the old, and I say old, like, it's the old number. I think from 2003, the Williams Institute out of UCLA put together a study. It was the most formal study at the time, and it was a very limited and a very flawed study, but ultimately kind of gave us a number that generally that people accepted as like, okay, as a baseline, 1% of the population is transgender, right? So 1 out of every 100. And that number, even though it seems small, is actually still quite big. Like if you have 1 out of every 100, that's a pretty big piece of the population, especially when you start to multiply it by, the ecosystem of people around that, right? So, and we'll talk more about that in a second. But realistically, another report, we're talking about 3 to 4% of the population. That's a report that came out just about a year and a half ago as part of the National Trans Center for Equality. They did one of the largest, most comprehensive studies to date. That original study was only talking to adults, and it was only surveying out adults. So so if you'd given me that, I would have said no, because I didn't even know what I was at the time. That's a whole nother podcast. But colleges and universities are reporting about 7 to 8% of their incoming freshman class are reporting somewhere on the gender non-binary spectrum, which doesn't necessarily mean they're transitioning like male to female, but they're observing this behavior of not exactly identifying as a boy or as a girl, or and there's all this like sort of space in between, and that is a alarmingly huge number, right? So if we're talking about let's just call it 5% of your incoming workforce is somewhere on that spectrum, you really need to shift your everything, right? Your hiring models, your recruiting questions, your everything on the front end, all that sort of tactical stuff. But you really need to start thinking strategically, what does this mean for our business? What does this mean for for banks? The question that they're asking is, what does this mean for the future of wealth, right? And if you start to think about that in the context of the long game of your business, this is a really significant change in your business, especially healthcare. There's all kinds of businesses that are based on like this very binary concept of male and female, including product lines and all kinds of stuff. So, if there's some change there, there can be a lot of upside. There can also be, a fair amount of risk in the near term. But I think for the companies that have figured this out and are thinking beyond kind of just, hey, I mean, the average, this is shifting thankfully, but the number of people that are like, we're not that interested because we don't have any trans employees. Like that kind of conversation is fading pretty quick because people are realizing, shit, if we have 100 employees, statistically, we probably have 3 to 4 that are repressed. And if you have, let's just say you have 3 to 4 that are out, let's just say hypothetically they are, then you have to think about the ecosystem around them. Their children, their spouses, your vendors, your suppliers, the customers. Like you potentially have thousands of trans identities surrounding your business, very quickly before you even realize it. And so your messaging, we kind of briefly touched earlier, I think like language matters. And so if you're looking to attract and retain the very best talent, even if the individual you're recruiting isn't trans, chances are they went to college with trans kids. And they want to be in an environment that's just as accepting of their identity as all their friends. So it requires a pretty big shift. And I think that the major call to action is to get educated, right? I mean, this is no longer a passive, like, hey, we'll wait until somebody transitions here kind of thing. You need to get ahead of this. And I think what's most amazing is when you see organizations kind of really putting that language out there to show that their current employees that this is okay. Like, this is, we are going to accept you for whoever you are, and seeing companies do things like that, bringing in trans speakers, celebrating trans awareness, day and transgender day of visibility and remembrance. All these things, mean a lot, again, to the mom whose daughter is trans. Right. And by the way, like, those same employees are going to be making like long-term career decisions about health benefits for their family based on which companies are offering transition-related insurances. So, this is really deep stuff. And there's a whole downside, like a whole like liability kind of side to it, but there's a ton of upside as well. And, trans people are from a customer perspective and an employee perspective, are ready to be loyal. Like, they're waiting for companies to say, like Salesforce, like, try and get a trans employee to leave Salesforce. Like, they will not, because they believe that that's their safe place. And it is, as a former Salesforce partner, a former Salesforce partner, a current Salesforce partner. It's incredible what they've done there. And so, there's a whole side of retention and engagement and loyalty that you can tap into. But at the same time, like, the employees themselves are, and sorry, not just the employees themselves, but it's the sort of, again, the ecosystem around them are looking for those opportunities to, like, my parents will only go to Target now, right? Mm. I mean, it sounds sort of simple, but like, it's like that they believe in what that company has done. And they, it's not gonna lie to you, they liked Target before, but they love them even more now.
Right.
It's just because of that sort of ecosystem around them, or around me, that has that impact. I think the smartest companies are tapping into that.
If you build it, they will come.
and some people will leave.
And some people will, yeah.
Like, it's amazing to me. I actually work with some banks on this type of conversation, and they literally, they'll have customers call them and say, I saw this poster you had hanging in the retail branch of, some sort of LGBT kind of thing. And I'm very concerned about that. And I don't want to be a part of this bank that, is promoting this lifestyle. And literally the chief diversity officer of these banks will write them letters back and say, here's the name of 4 of our competitors. Go.
But I mean, I think, the world is changing, right? And I think there was a time when the risk of who you would lose was greater than the risk, than like the plus of who you're going to attract. But that's flipped. And, it's and I think that smart businesses see that. Like, yeah, people may want to walk away, but a lot more people are going to be like your parents and say, oh, wait a minute, this is my store now.
Yeah.
This is my bank.
Yeah. I mean, it's really pretty amazing. And people are going to walk away, and that's fine. But I think, if your top sales performer is, racist and not inclusive, like, you
got so many problems there. Yeah.
Yes. You got other problems to worry about.
You can't, then and if you're keeping someone because they are a quote unquote top performer, but they bring all of that problematic behavior, then you're making a bad business decision.
Yeah. Well, and they're also probably not realistically a top performer in
right.
I mean, I think that used to be something but now we know everything. I mean, everything's so measurable. Like you can really tell through people.
Yeah. Yeah. You can. Well, Natalie, it is now time for everyone's favorite part of our show, the half-hour question connection. Woohoo! Just like on the quote regular HR Social Hour, but we put a little female twist on it because we are trying to lift up female voices. So, but the first thing that is so important to us at the Social Hour and HR Wonder Women is networking and meeting people. So, how has networking helped your career, and what's been really effective for you for successful networking?
So, networking has taken on a new meaning for me in my transition. I think it used to really be about getting leads. And now it's really about, building my community and the sort of structures that I need to become the best version of myself and help other people do so as well. And, it's really a very collaborative concept as opposed to, some sort of like game of survival and kind of winning. So it's really it's changed quite a bit. And for me as a trans woman, transitioning in the middle of my career, at a very critical point in my career, women in particular, cis women, straight cis women, allies, have been an incredible resource for me in terms of making this pivot. And I do oftentimes refer to it as a pivot. It's funny, when I came out to the board of directors at my previous company, I had this whole long speech about the pivot and how pivots are about survival. And this is my pivot to survive the next 40 years. But networking has been, critical in terms of, me becoming me. And there's just been some women in my life early in this transition that just unquestionably, or didn't even question, taking me under their wing and helping me become the best version of me. And at the beginning, I didn't even understand it. I was like, what are they going to get out of this? I can't give them anything. Like I was always in that conversation, like, why are they helping me? Because I can do nothing for them. And that was one of the biggest lessons that I learned right at the beginning, is that that's not what this is about. Then traditionally in the sort of male-dominated networking world, you would only network with somebody who, could clearly help you and you could help them. That was kind of like the symbiotic relationship. And I found it to be much different and much more fulfilling. And, not that it's right or wrong, but it's just what I need. And so what's been effective for me in networking, I go to a lot of events, specifically for the LGBTQIA sort of communities. And so I'm a member of NGLCC, which is the National LGBT Chamber of Commerce. I'm a member of Start Out, which is a networking group specifically on queer entrepreneurs in tech, or for queer entrepreneurs in tech. And then I'm also a member of Out in Tech, which is for anyone that's sort of LGBT in the space. And those events have been game changing for me in every single way. The amount of opportunities that have come out of that, from a professional perspective, like lead generation, whether it's customers or investors or employees, like potential associates to work with me, it's been invaluable. But more than that, it's been the camaraderie and the kind of relationships that have been being developed. It's very interesting now that I can finally be me, and it gets definitely into the space that I'm in. But there's no, there's literally no line between my professional world and my personal world. And I used to say that, and I used to think that, but it's actually true. And so it's really interesting to try and navigate these relationships, though. When you really are very good friends with them, you almost prefer to be friends with them, but you also they're also a really big customer. It's like, how do I deal with this? Like, am I going out to dinner with you tonight as friends or as a customer? And professional relationship. And it really is interesting because you can have both. You just have to have the right tools and language to kind of navigate it.
Yeah. I actually just sent somebody an email today and said, I need your advice. So I think you need to give me, quote me a fee as a consultant, because I don't think that this is a friend conversation, right? Because I need more than that from you today. Yeah. Tell us which women you read or follow for professional insights.
Okay. So I loved it when you asked this. So I'm new to all this, right? So I've only been out for about 3 years, and prior to my transition, I had almost nothing to do with for lack of a better way of saying it, like women in business. I mean, I didn't know any. I mean, I knew Sheryl Sandberg, maybe. That was kind of that's all I knew. And to be honest, I actually didn't like a lot of powerful women. Like they were. Anyone that was sort of quote unquote alpha, an alpha, I would butt heads with it. And but now, that's completely shifted. And I realized that sort of tension was actually a lot of jealousy. And I would have never figured that out at the time. But in terms of who do I follow and read these days? So one of my favorite things that just keeps me up to date on everything is an email newsletter that I read called The Broadsheet. So I don't know if you all know that, but it's produced by Fortune magazine, and you can just subscribe to it. They give you the daily broadsheet. And actually, I think the topic this morning, I think the subject heading was something about there's a book out called Alpha Women, and so I like to stay up on that. I love. Anyone that's been involved in these movements, these incredible women's movements. So all of the tech women in tech, all the women in VCs that are doing that. In particular, Whitney Wolf is one of my absolute favorites, CEO of Bumble, which I'm a little biased on, but I was a huge fan before we got involved with them. Same with Serena Williams. Huge fan forever, but now become involved professionally as well. But across the spectrum there, I love. Oh gosh, I don't know your name. You could edit out this part. Oh my God, this is so bad.
You could also.
What's her name with the people
to add to the show notes?
Yeah.
She's the CEO of the Girl Scouts now, but I'm completely.
Oh, Sylvia.
Sylvia.
It starts with an M, doesn't it?
No.
All right, here we go.
I obviously don't. It's you can see her as Acevedo. That's what it is. So Sylvia Acevedo, I saw her speak, and then I've now been on a panel with her twice. And she's just incredible.
Awesome.
But as a Latin American, woman in the early days of engineering at IBM, she was one of the first, coders there. And anyone that's been in that sort of I'm the only one conversation. Another person who's on this list, it's just now that I'm tapping back into it. So Ursula Burns, former CEO of Xerox. I mean, talk about being otherized your whole life. All of these people I have a deep identity kind of relationship with. And so they're just role models for me. And I do love them. I have a couple personal friends, Kelly Khalil, who is one of the original women that really took me under her wing, who's the CEO of Loverly, which is a wedding planning app. She's become incredible. I mean, she's now on the board of directors for Translator, and I just, I really look up to her, and she's a peer and she's a friend, but I really follow her. I look to her in ways that it's just really special.
Awesome. Favorite movie that features a strong female cast?
So I I love strong women, right? Just almost like, and I think that that's like one of the new revolutions. I feel like it's like, I just feel like really strong women are everywhere. And I think that that's really one of the most beautiful things that I think you can see is a woman who's confident and strong and believes in herself. So I really love movies like that. I think all these new movies that are coming out, focused on women and women's stories are really, really important. But I think movies lately that have really moved me, Wonder Woman. I mean, my whole life I looked up to, she was my superhero that I really wanted to identify with, and I never could. And so, that was really a big one for me. And I love how women are taking over a lot of these shows. I don't know if you're, I don't know how much of a spoiler, well, it's not really a spoiler, but I feel like Game of Thrones has become this like incredible, like cast of women that are really, really the boss in a lot of ways. And I don't know if you all watched last night, but like, I mean, it's like Arya Stark is like, I mean, that's who the moment I saw her, what was now 10 years ago, I was like, that would be me if I could have been me. Like, I identified with her, and now watching her, basically slay the whatever he's called, the Winter King, whatever the hell he's called. I don't even pay that much attention to the Night King, whatever. That didn't happen before. You didn't see women in character roles like that. And I think that the work that Gina Davis is doing in particular, in terms of really changing that dynamic in movies and medias is so important to creating representation so that this becomes more normal. I think growing up, I didn't see strong female casts. I had sort of role models. I always really looked up to Natalie Portman. It's probably one of the reasons I have the name Natalie, to be honest. So there's a lot of really strong women out there that I love.
Awesome. How about favorite female musician or band?
Yeah, so that one is pretty easy for me. Katy Perry. I just can't help it. I mean, I've sort of been a Katy Perry fan my whole life, and it was a secret for a long time. Like, I didn't let anyone know that I really loved Katy Perry, but now, I mean, now I can put it out there, right? I mean, I think she's amazing, and that's definitely my favorite female musician.
How about a favorite female protagonist in a book or favorite female fictional character?
Yeah, I mean, I think after last night, it's definitely Arya Stark. You all watch Game of Thrones?
I do not.
Yeah, I don't either, but I would tell you what, I was telling somebody at work today, like, even not watching it, just watching Twitter last night, I could tell that episode was just on fire.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But yeah, I think just based on last night, Arya Stark. I mean, it just was so empowering for me to watch that last night. I was like, oh my God. And she actually had a very controversial sex scene last week. And she's 21 now, I think, or 22 now in real life. But when she started on the show, she was only 10 or 11. And there's all this outrage about this sex scene. And I'm like, you go, girl. Like, I mean, I just think there's so much negative stigma around our bodies and it's because it's not talked about. It's not, it's not something that we shame people. And there's all this sort of, hypocrisy in how we shame people. But like, body shaming I used to subscribe to that, and now, I mean, I'm so body positive, and I just love the fact that she has the confidence to get onto camera and be herself. It's very real. Like that's part of the problem is like when we shame things or hide things that are real. That's what bothers me. Sex is real. Like, why can't we put it out there? Women grow up. Why can't we put it out there? It's like, and it's it's really interesting to think about and study. But I was really excited for her and for all women. Even for the women that aren't excited about that, I'm like, we need more diversity.
So, final question. What do you like to do outside of work? You've already said that you're a runner, so
I was going to say.
It might have already been a spoiler, but
yeah, it's a little bit of a spoiler. I mean, I wish I had more time to do stuff outside of work. And I don't, unfortunately. So I find that most of my time is spent running. And I think that'll come. But as I mentioned earlier, my life and my work are so highly, correlated and tied together that it's kind of like, I feel like I'm always working. Even when I go to an event or do something fun, like I'm working. Oftentimes the people that I'm around are potential investors, they're current customers, they're either employees or somehow connected to my space. Very rarely, and I wish I had more friends that had nothing to do with either technology or the trans identity or the trans experience. But I feel like I'm kind of surrounded by people in tech or they're trans, and that's just my conversations are constant. But I do love to run. I feel like running is the only time that, because I work so much, I work 24/7, I'd argue that I'm working all the time, because like my brain is constantly running models and asking questions like what if, like I'm always doing these what if models. And the only time that stops, you could say when I'm sleeping, but I might argue that I'm still doing it, is when I'm running. And so I sort of enter this very Zen-like mode when I run. And while I'm still thinking, thoughts come into my brain. They don't stick. They don't stick and manifest. And when I'm running, they sort of come and then they go. And it's much more of like a meditation kind of Zen-like moment where you sort of observe the thought, but you don't let it, have you. And so that's why running has become such an important part of my life, is it's because it's this outlet for me to sort of shut down my brain. But outside of running, I love spending time with my kids, of course. And I love helping people. Typically I feel like I'm helping people with diversity and inclusion issues a lot, but so it brings me back to work pretty quickly. But I would love to spend more time on a beach. Like literally, absolutely. If I could, I would love to do nothing for fun. That would be nice.
Yes. That would be awesome.
Like, what do you do for fun? I do nothing.
Nothing. I do nothing.
Yeah.
Oh. Well, Natalie, you have survived the show. Thank you so much for being here tonight. This is your opportunity to tell our listeners how they can find you online so that they can learn more and connect with you.
Sure. So personally, you can find me almost on any social media platform. It's just Natalie J Egan. So it's all one word, Natalie, and then the letter J, and then my last name, which is Egan, Egan. So just at Natalie J Egan. You can find me on Instagram and other networks, mostly Instagram. That's kind of my jam. So find me there. Online, if you want to learn more about Translator and our business, which, by the way, I don't even know if I mentioned that, but we build diversity and inclusion software for corporations, schools, and nonprofits. So definitely check us out on the World Wide Web at translator.company. So it's www.translator.company, not .com. It's .company. But you can find us on the internet at translator.company. We'd love to hear from you. There's all kinds of ways that I'm sure we could collaborate to help you all move the needle in terms of creating a more authentic and engaged and diverse organization. So thank you so much for having me, Wendy.
Yeah. Yes. We'll put that all in the show notes. Anne, how can people find you?
I'm just going to say Twitter. It's at Ann Tomk, ANNETOMK. I guess I'm also on LinkedIn and Facebook, not so much on Instagram. I'm on Instagram to see pictures of the grandbabies, and that's pretty much it. Yeah, I'm thinking that's about it these days. Yeah.
All right. We'll find you
might
on Twitter.
blog again someday.
For me, find me on Twitter, Wendell93. Y'all know that. Find me there. Join us the fourth Sunday of each month for the HR Social Hour or HR Social Hour Twitter chat. And a special shout out tonight to Skills for all their help with wonderful shows. Thank you so much. Always, Anne, thank you for joining me. And for HR Social Hour and HR Wonder Women, this is Wendy Daly. Now, go tell your story.